Imagine waking up in a world that no longer makes sense, a place where the sun rises and sets without purpose, where laughter echoes hollowly against the walls of your soul, and where every achievement feels like a shadow cast by an unseen light. You stand at the edge of existence, peering into an abyss that offers no answers, only questions. What is the point? Why do you strive for success, love, or happiness when everything seems destined to dissolve into nothingness? This is the paradox that Nietzsche illuminated. In a universe devoid of inherent meaning, how can one find purpose? It's a question that gnaws at the very core of our being, demanding confrontation yet offering no easy resolution. The contradiction lies starkly before us. Society tells us to pursue happiness, to chase dreams. But what happens when those dreams crumble under the weight of reality? Each day we are bombarded with messages that suggest success equates to fulfillment. Yet countless individuals find themselves trapped in cycles of despair, feeling more lost than ever. The relentless pursuit of external validation becomes a treadmill, spinning faster and faster while leading nowhere. We are told to follow our passions, but what if those passions lead us into darkness? What if the very act of seeking meaning becomes a source of existential dread? This tension builds within you, a pressure cooker of unspoken fears and doubts. You might have experienced moments of clarity, fleeting glimpses of something greater, only to be pulled back into the mundane grind of daily life. The weight of this paradox presses down on your chest, urging you to confront the uncomfortable truth. Perhaps the meaning you seek cannot be found in the prescribed paths laid out by others. Maybe it is not waiting to be discovered, but rather demands to be created. A daunting realization that challenges everything you've been taught about life, purpose, and your place in the world. As you grapple with these thoughts, consider the implications of living without a guiding narrative. Without a clear understanding of what gives your life significance, how can you navigate the complexities of existence? Are you merely a product of circumstance? Or do you possess the power to forge your own destiny? These questions linger in the air, heavy with the gravity of their implications, urging you to delve deeper into the labyrinth of your consciousness. What does it mean to create your own meaning in a world that often feels indifferent? Can you rise above the chaos and carve out a path that resonates with your true self? As you ponder these inquiries, remember that the journey ahead is fraught with uncertainty, yet it is also ripe with potential. The road to self-discovery may be arduous, but it beckons you to embrace the challenge and discover the depths of your own spirit. In this exploration lies the promise of liberation, an invitation to reclaim your narrative and redefine what it means to live authentically. For centuries, humanity has clung to the belief that meaning is handed down from higher powers, societal structures, or universal truths. From the divine commandments of ancient religions to the moral frameworks dictated by modern institutions, people have long sought refuge in externally imposed values. But what if these sources of meaning were never meant to serve as absolute anchors? What if they were instead illusions carefully constructed to shield us from the terrifying void of existence? Consider the psychological mechanisms at play. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures, wired to impose order on chaos. Our brains crave certainty, and so we construct narratives, religious doctrines, cultural traditions, career ladders, to provide structure to our lives. These constructs offer comfort, promising that if we follow the right steps, we will achieve fulfillment. Yet beneath this comforting illusion lurks a dangerous dependency. When meaning is given rather than created, individuals become passive recipients of someone else's vision. They stop questioning, stop searching, and eventually stop truly living. Philosophers throughout history have wrestled with this dilemma. Plato warned of the dangers of ignorance through his allegory of the cave, depicting prisoners who mistake shadows on a wall for reality. Descartes urged radical doubt, challenging people to question everything they had accepted as truth. But it was Nietzsche who delivered the most piercing critique of all. He saw that the collapse of religious faith, the death of God, left a vacuum in human consciousness, one that could either lead to despair or to liberation. Without an external authority dictating meaning, individuals were forced to confront the terrifying freedom of self-creation. Yet even now, long after Nietzsche's proclamation, many still refuse to face this reality. Instead, they replace old dogmas with new ones: consumerism, nationalism, social media validation, each promising a sense of belonging and purpose. But these substitutes are fragile, built on shifting sands. The moment they fail to deliver the promised satisfaction, disillusionment sets in. People begin to question why they feel empty, despite having achieved what society defines as success. They wonder why, despite following all the rules, they still feel adrift. Psychologically, this phenomenon manifests as existential anxiety. Studies in existential psychology reveal that when people lack a sense of purpose, they experience heightened distress, depression, and even physical ailments. The absence of meaning is not merely an abstract philosophical concern. It has real, tangible consequences on mental and emotional well-being. And yet, rather than confronting this void head-on, many retreat further into distractions, numbing themselves with endless entertainment, superficial relationships, or material pursuits. The deeper consequence of this avoidance is identity erosion. When individuals rely on external structures to define their worth, they risk losing touch with their authentic selves. Their desires become shaped by expectations rather than genuine passion. Their goals are borrowed rather than self-determined. Over time, they begin to feel disconnected from their own lives, as though they are performing a role rather than living authentically. This dissonance breeds frustration, resentment, and a creeping sense of futility. History is littered with examples of those who dared to break free from these imposed meanings. Thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard rejected blind adherence to religious doctrine, advocating instead for a deeply personal relationship with faith. Artists like Vincent van Gogh defied conventional standards of success, choosing to pursue artistic expression despite rejection and poverty. Revolutionaries like Simone de Beauvoir challenged societal norms, insisting that individuals must define their own existence rather than accept predefined roles. These figures did not wait for meaning to be handed to them. They forged their own paths, embracing the uncertainty and responsibility that came with it. But such defiance is rare. Most people remain ensnared in the web of inherited beliefs, too afraid to face the abyss of self-creation. They fear that without external guidance, they will be consumed by emptiness. And yet, the alternative, living a life shaped by forces beyond one's control, is its own kind of slow death. The question remains, is it better to live in comfortable delusion or to step into the unknown, forging meaning from the raw materials of existence itself? The answer, unsettling as it may be, lies in the willingness to confront the void, not as a threat, but as an opportunity. To create meaning is not to deny the chaos of the universe, but to engage with it, to shape it into something uniquely one's own. And in doing so, one ceases to be a mere passenger in life, becoming instead the author of their own story. Beneath the surface of conscious thought, an intricate web of unseen forces shapes your perception of reality. These forces are not always obvious. They operate silently, woven into the fabric of culture, language, and biology itself. Consider the way your brain processes information. It is not a blank slate, but a finely tuned instrument calibrated by evolution to prioritize survival over truth. Cognitive biases distort your perception, reinforcing familiar patterns while rejecting the unfamiliar. Confirmation bias leads you to seek out information that aligns with your existing beliefs, creating echo chambers that reinforce inherited meaning. The availability heuristic tricks you into believing that what is most easily recalled is also most significant, trapping you in a cycle of reactive thinking rather than deep reflection. These neurological shortcuts are not inherently malicious. They evolved to help humans navigate a complex world efficiently. But in modern society, where meaning is often manufactured rather than discovered, they become invisible chains that prevent you from breaking free. You believe you are making independent choices, yet your decisions are subtly influenced by cultural conditioning. The values you hold, the aspirations you chase, even the emotions you deem appropriate, all are shaped by forces beyond your awareness. You wake each morning with a sense of urgency, compelled to pursue success, stability, or happiness. But rarely do you question where these imperatives come from. Cultural conditioning is particularly insidious because it masquerades as choice. You tell yourself you want financial security, social status, or romantic fulfillment, yet these desires are often internalized from childhood. Your parents, teachers, and media all reinforced certain ideals, painting a picture of what a meaningful life should look like. Even rebellion against these norms is often just another form of conformity, a reaction rather than a true assertion of self. The result is a life lived according to scripts written by others, leaving little room for genuine self-creation. And yet, the cost of this silent obedience is profound. When you outsource meaning to external authorities, be they religious, political, or economic, you relinquish agency over your own existence. You become dependent on validation, constantly measuring your worth against arbitrary benchmarks. Success is defined by productivity, happiness by consumption, and value by comparison. The moment you fall short of these expectations, you experience a crisis, not because you have failed, but because the entire framework upon which you built your identity begins to crack. This dependency is not accidental. It is engineered. Societies thrive on predictability, and systems of power benefit from individuals who conform rather than question. Consumer economies depend on perpetual dissatisfaction, ensuring that people remain in a state of constant striving rather than contentment. Political ideologies exploit fear and uncertainty, offering simplistic solutions to complex problems. Social hierarchies maintain control by convincing individuals that their worth is tied to external achievements rather than intrinsic value. All of these mechanisms work together to reinforce a worldview that discourages self-exploration and promotes passive acceptance. The neurological and psychological consequences of this conditioning are staggering. Research in neuroscience shows that chronic exposure to stress-inducing environments, such as high-pressure workplaces or competitive social structures, alters brain chemistry, increasing cortisol levels and diminishing cognitive flexibility. Over time, this leads to burnout, apathy, and a diminished capacity for creative thought. The very mechanisms designed to help you survive begin to erode your ability to thrive. You become trapped in a cycle of automatic behavior, repeating patterns without questioning their origins. Worse still, this conditioning fosters a deep sense of alienation. When your sense of self is shaped by external forces, you begin to feel disconnected from your own desires. You may find yourself pursuing goals that once seemed important, but now feel hollow. Relationships become transactional rather than intimate. Work becomes a burden rather than a calling. The gap between who you are and who you are expected to be widens, creating an internal conflict that manifests as anxiety, depression, or existential despair. And yet there is a strange comfort in this suffering. At least within the confines of conditioned existence, you know the rules, however arbitrary they may be. To step outside of them is to embrace uncertainty, to confront the terrifying possibility that meaning is not something to be found, but something to be made. It is easier to cling to the familiar even when it no longer serves you than to face the unknown. But the price of this comfort is stagnation, a life half-lived, dictated by forces beyond your control. The question then becomes, how do you escape? If meaning is not given but must be created, how do you begin the process of dismantling the invisible chains that bind you? The answer lies not in rejecting all external influences, but in developing the awareness necessary to choose them consciously. It requires a radical re-examination of your deepest beliefs, a willingness to sit with discomfort, and the courage to forge a new path forward. Because the truth is, you already possess the power to reshape your reality. The question is whether you are ready to claim it. To create meaning is not simply to declare a purpose and move forward with unwavering conviction. It is to dismantle the foundation upon which your understanding of existence rests and rebuild it from the ground up. It is an act of defiance against the inertia of tradition, a refusal to accept inherited truths as immutable law. Most people live their entire lives within the boundaries drawn by others, never realizing that the lines were drawn in sand, not stone. But to break free is to recognize that meaning is not discovered like a hidden treasure, nor granted like a divine decree, but forged through the crucible of experience, struggle, and self-awareness. Consider the radical shift required to embrace this truth. For most of your life, you have been trained to seek validation from external sources, to measure your worth by productivity, to define success through comparison, to equate happiness with comfort. But what if none of these metrics were objective realities, but rather constructs designed to keep you in a state of perpetual striving? What if the very idea of meaning, as something to be found was a deception, a trick played by societies that feared the chaos of unbridled self-creation. This realization is both terrifying and exhilarating. It strips away the illusion of certainty, forcing you to confront the vast, undefined expanse of possibility. There is no map, no guidebook, no set of instructions handed down from on high. You are left alone with your own mind, your own desires, your own limitations. But within that solitude lies the greatest power of all, the ability to craft your own reality. Think of those who have done this before you, not the celebrated heroes of history, but the quiet revolutionaries who refused to live by the script handed to them. Friedrich Nietzsche himself, exiled from academia, wrote in solitude, declaring that man must become what he is. Vincent van Gogh, dismissed and destitute, painted not for fame, but for the sheer necessity of creation. Simone Weil, born into privilege, chose to abandon comfort and immerse herself in the struggles of the working class, seeking meaning not in luxury, but in shared hardship. These individuals did not wait for meaning to be bestowed upon them. They seized it, carved it from the raw materials of their experiences, their suffering, their defiance. To follow in their footsteps is not to mimic their actions, but to adopt their mindset. It is to reject the notion that life must conform to preordained structures, that fulfillment is a destination rather than a process. It is to understand that meaning is not static. It is dynamic, evolving with you as you grow, change, and confront the inevitable crises of existence. This does not mean abandoning all external influences, nor does it require complete isolation from society. Rather, it demands discernment. It asks you to examine every belief, every value, every expectation placed upon you and ask, does this serve me? Does this align with my deepest truth? Or am I clinging to it out of habit, fear, or obligation? The process of self-creation is not a single moment of revelation, but a continuous act of reinvention. It requires discipline, not in the rigid sense of constraint, but in the sense of intentional direction. It demands resilience in the face of uncertainty, the courage to walk into the unknown without guarantees. It necessitates humility, recognizing that your understanding of meaning will shift over time, that what once felt essential may later prove irrelevant. And yet, for all its difficulty, this path offers a depth of fulfillment that no external validation can match. When you create your own meaning, you cease to be a spectator in your own life. You become the artist, the architect, the author of your existence. Every decision, every action carries weight because it is chosen, not inherited. You no longer need to prove your worth to anyone else, because your purpose is not derived from comparison, but from self-definition. This is not a call to reckless individualism, nor a rejection of community. On the contrary, the most profound acts of self-creation often emerge in dialogue with others, in response to the needs of the world. The poet creates meaning through words that resonate with others. The scientist discovers meaning in unraveling the mysteries of nature. The teacher finds meaning in shaping young minds. But crucially, these pursuits are not undertaken to fulfill an external mandate, but because they arise from an inner necessity, a deep and unshakable conviction. So how do you begin? By first acknowledging that the search for meaning is not about finding something that already exists, but about building something that never has. It starts with questioning everything you have been told, including the belief that meaning must take a particular form. It continues with experimentation, testing different ways of living, different modes of engagement with the world. It evolves through failure, through disappointment, through the realization that some pursuits will not yield the results you hoped for. But that does not make them meaningless. Above all, it requires presence. Meaning is not found in some distant future, nor in some idealized version of yourself. It is uncovered in the here and now, in the choices you make, in the way you respond to adversity, in the way you treat others, in the way you carry yourself through the ordinary moments of life. It is not grand gestures alone that give life meaning, but the accumulation of small, deliberate acts that reflect your deepest values. This is the radical truth that Nietzsche illuminated, that in a world devoid of inherent meaning, the only true freedom lies in the audacity to create your own. Not because you have been told to, not because you are seeking approval, but because you refuse to let anyone else define the terms of your existence. And once you grasp this, Nothing will ever be the same again. There is a moment, rare, fleeting, yet utterly transformative, when the veil lifts, and you see the world not as it has been described to you, but as it truly is. Not as a fixed structure of predetermined meanings, but as an open expanse, infinite in possibility. In that instant, you realize that the entire scaffolding of beliefs, expectations, and inherited certainties that once defined your reality was never meant to be permanent. It was never meant to be a cage. It was meant to be a foundation, a launching point from which you would eventually leap into the unknown and begin the real work of creation. This is the final, most powerful realization. That meaning is not something to be discovered, nor something to be assigned by others. It is not a prize to be won, or a destination to be reached. It is a continuous act of becoming. It is the art of shaping your life as you would shape a masterpiece, not by following a blueprint, but by responding to the raw materials at hand, by listening to the rhythms of your own soul, by daring to build something entirely your own. This understanding reframes everything. Suddenly, the failures that once felt like proof of inadequacy are revealed as necessary steps in the creative process. The moments of doubt, the periods of confusion, the times when everything seemed to fall apart, are not signs of error, but invitations to reinvent. The loss of old beliefs, the crumbling of once sacred structures, the dissolution of certainty, these are not tragedies, but the necessary destruction that precedes creation. You begin to see that the very thing you feared most, uncertainty, is not your enemy, but your greatest ally. Because it is in the space of the unknown that meaning is born. It is in the absence of guaranteed outcomes that you are forced to make choices that are truly your own. It is in the face of ambiguity that you discover who you really are, stripped of all pretense, all borrowed identities, all borrowed meanings. This is not a passive surrender to fate, nor a nihilistic resignation to the void. It is the opposite. It is the fiercest affirmation of life possible. It is the declaration that even in a universe indifferent to your existence, you will carve out a space that is uniquely yours. You will not wait for meaning to be handed to you. You will not allow others to dictate the terms of your purpose. You will not be bound by the constraints of tradition, nor paralyzed by the fear of failure. Instead, you will create. You will experiment. You will stumble. You will fall. You will rise again. Not because you are guaranteed success, but because the act of creation itself is the ultimate triumph. Because to live authentically is to embrace the full spectrum of existence, the joy, the sorrow, the beauty, the pain, and to weave them into something that only you can bring into being. This is the essence of what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate. Not a passive acceptance of whatever life throws at you, but an active embrace of all that is, a recognition that even the darkest moments hold the seeds of transformation. It is the understanding that nothing in your life is wasted, that every experience, every wound, every longing is fuel for the fire of creation. And so, you begin to live differently. You no longer measure your worth by external validation. You no longer seek approval from voices that do not belong to you. You no longer wait for permission to be who you are. Instead, you listen to the quiet whispers of your own spirit, the subtle pull of what feels true, what feels essential. You trust yourself, not because you are infallible, but because you are willing to learn, to adapt, to grow. In this new way of being, you find a freedom that was previously unimaginable. You no longer need to cling to rigid ideologies or desperate hopes for certainty. You no longer need to fear the unknown, because you have learned to walk into it with courage. You no longer need to run from suffering, because you have discovered that even in pain, there is the possibility of creation. This is the ultimate act of self-mastery, to recognize that you are not merely a product of circumstance, but a force of intention. That you are not bound by the past, nor dictated by the expectations of others. That you are not a passive observer of life, but an active participant in the unfolding of your own story. And so, the question returns, not as a burden, but as an invitation. What will you create? What meaning will you bring forth from the chaos of existence? What legacy will you leave, not in the annals of history, but in the quiet moments of your own life? The answer is yours to write, not in theory, not in abstraction, but in action, in choice, in the way you meet each day, each challenge, each moment of uncertainty. Because in the end, the only meaning that truly matters is the one you create. And once you understand that, nothing will ever be able to take it from you again.